last night we were talking as an editorial team, and if the Adam Toledo video had not come out today, this show actually would have been just wall to wall good news. And we are actually going to do the Booney Dog story last to let's really close on it. So we had to shuffle things around. The other thing is because of the Adam Toledo, we're not doing Malcontented Minutes tonight. We'd explained last week we would do it once a week. We have put Malcontented Minutes on the floor. It will be back next week. We had part one of the interview with Nikkita Oliver and their platform for their campaign for seat number 9 on the Seattle City Council. We are now going to include and go on with the second part of that interview.
When compared to West Coast cities, especially Portland, San Francisco, San Jose, Sacramento, Oakland, and San Diego, Seattle has the second highest cost per police officer, tied with Oakland, and the second highest officer per capita behind San Francisco. Additionally, the average officer makes $153,000 a year before benefits, according to the Seattle Times. Despite this large force and supporting budget, Seattle police report slow response times and claim the issue to be a lack of staff. The budget was cut approximately 18%, and staffing levels were adjusted to support roughly 1,325 officers. How would you define defund the police? What is your position on that? And how, as a member of the city council, do you restore community trust in SPD?
Defund the police is also invest in community. I think it's really important not to separate those two from each other. I think it's also important to acknowledge that our current system of public safety does not create safety for everyone. And in fact, there are many communities that are actually less safe when they call the police. And there are communities that are actually afraid to call the police when they're actually in need of support. I think we also have to acknowledge that we do not have the myriad of services that we need to ensure that people are safer. Police are not typically doing what we think. I think a lot of folks have it in their minds, maybe from movies or a TV, that police are all day responding to violent crime and violent calls. Reality is a lot of what police officers are doing are responding to things involving property or maybe parking issues or even noise complaints. That is the majority. In Seattle, I think 1.3 of the calls that come through 911 are quote unquote violent crime. So that's actually a very small percentage. I think we've also seen, and I know you've seen this having been at the protest, there will be an obscene amount of police officers at the protest, and then later we'll find out that something else was happening in the city, but SPD will say that they had very slow response times. And so I would wonder, how are they prioritizing what's important for their presence to be at? That being said, I do have to go back to the underpinning thing here. Our system of public safety is not one that works for everyone. And we've heard this time and time again. It's not new information. It's not new as of 2020. In fact, these are conversations that people have been having for a long time about public safety and what really makes communities safe. An 18% defund of a police department that has one of the highest budgets in the entire United States really is not that much. SPD's budget prior to this last budget cycle was $410 million, and they often actually spent over that budget and would be asking the council for additional dollars, in addition to receiving money from groups like the Seattle Foundation, giving dollars to the Police Foundation that then gave money to the department to buy more equipment. So there's also additional dollars, including federal dollars, that come into the Seattle Police Department on a regular basis. So I don't believe that they're actually hurting for money. What is hurting for financial resources are community-based responses to intervening with harm and responding to harm when it happens. I'm thinking about, what do people do when they're in domestic violence situations and they do not believe that calling the police is going to make it safer. This was my own life at one point in time. With a partner of mine, I did not feel like I could call the police for support because at the time I was dating a 6'7" Black man, and did not think that calling the police was going to make our situation any better. In fact, it worried me that something might happen to him and his life if I did that. And is that a burden I wanted to carry? I am not the only Black person who has ever been in that situation and thought about that. I'm certainly not the only person. There are families who also are afraid to call the cops when their loved ones are having mental health crises. We know that this is happening. We also know that the police are ill-equipped to respond to these types of situations. Why are we not investing more of our public safety budget and ensuring that we have the resources that can meet a multiplicity of needs, knowing that most of the things that people call 911 for actually do not need an armed officer to come to the door. And so my goal is, my hope as a city council member, is that we can actually continue building upon the things that we know work. Mental health supports, people who can respond to mental health crises. I'm thinking right now about Tommy Lay, whose family just received a big settlement, but will never receive Tommy back, who is in the midst of a mental health crisis. Charlena Lyles was in the midst of a mental health crisis. Charlena could still be here with us if we had had the right support. How are we doing the work of learning from these tragedies to actually be doing the things that we know work for community members? And that's my goal, prioritizing our public safety budget to actually do the things that make communities safe in terms of our ability to respond to mental health crises, domestic violence, to intervene and stop violence before it occurs, because that would be the ideal. And this is the last part of this, is police are often called after harm has already occurred. So it is already a reactionary measure to public safety. What would it look like if we built a city where we built the priorities of our public safety system around preventing and intervening harm rather than responding once it's already happened? We could actually keep a lot of people out of the criminal punishment system, which is a broader system that needs to be addressed in relationship to policing. And we could prevent a lot of harm to families and people in our city if we approach public safety from that place instead.
I'm glad you brought up mental health. Let's talk about that for a second, because I do think it's an important issue. One of many things that COVID has shed light on is the ongoing mental health crisis in this country. Seattle is not exempt from this, of course. Recently, a man in the throes of a mental health crisis was fatally wounded by the Seattle Police Department near the Seattle waterfront. Washington State has consistently ranked toward the bottom for public health services for the mentally ill. What would you do as a member of the City Council to address this mental health crisis?
And the incident you mentioned hits close to home because he was a student at Seattle University where I teach. I think people read these stories and they forget that folks are actually in our communities that are having crisis and then have deadly encounters with police. What can we do? So as we continue the work around defunding and divesting and investing into structures that work, we can actually invest in mental health professionals and intervention services that actually work. I've had to call for a county mental health professional, a county MHP before, and it's taken 24 hours before that MHP has been able to respond to the crises that I've been in with a client. And often what this means is myself or family members of this person end up having to stay with them 24/7, in some instances following them around the city to try to keep them safe or avoid an interaction with police. And sometimes it still ends up in an interaction with police. The fact that we invest so much money in a system that is not able to actually respond to the needs we know are most emergent is fiscally irresponsible, but it's also socially irresponsible. So I think finding ways financially to beef up our mental health professional options, whether that's looking at programs like Cahoots. I'm not saying specifically Cahoots because that model was developed in a particular context, and all models that develop one place cannot just be transferred to another place. We need to be thoughtful about how we develop more mental health supports in the city. And that's what defunding is actually about. It is about finding the thing to invest in that actually will do the work that we need. And we know that mental health has always been something that people need response to, but the recession and the pandemic have certainly exacerbated the mental health crises that we're facing. We do have organizations that are able to support folks in crisis, but we certainly don't have enough of them. And when you have to wait 24 hours or more before someone is able to meet you, what that likely means is that your loved one has probably spun out much farther than they were 24 hours prior. And it's even harder to do the work of mitigating harm and ensuring that person gets the supports. The other thing is I think we need to work better with our hospitals. I've gone to the hospital with folks wanting to admit themselves for support, and just the process of doing that comes with a lot of stigma. It's a very cumbersome process, and you often have to prove that you are suicidal or other things that will make them want to bring you into the hospital. And so we need to change that process. If someone comes to you saying they need help, we should just get them help. The third issue that is attached to that, though, is we just simply do not have enough beds, mental health professionals, or mental health supports in our region. So when people do go to the hospital saying they would like to get supports, they're often told there isn't a bed for them. And so how can we be providing more of those spaces within the city, using the budget we have to do that, and actually investing in the things that work And the last thing I would say, I keep coming back to healthcare, but we don't have full spectrum healthcare for some folks. And as a result, when they seek out mental health support, they're not able to pay for it. So is there a way for the city, and I would put the county in there to partner, because the county does do a lot of public health work. Can we be developing ways that people can access mental health supports prior to being in crisis that doesn't require them to have health insurance, knowing that ultimately when we can get people mental health supports early on, we actually make everyone, including that person, much safer.
Black Coffee is a hub for communities and a hub for meeting people, making friends, and understanding.
What Black Coffee is to me is a place to actually call home, a place where Black youth will feel welcomed, where Black families will come and feel like they're at home.
What we're trying to build is more than just coffee. Community is something that we do naturally. We know who's in the community, we know what the deficits are, and we're trying to fix that. We want to bring people together.
My hope is that the phrase grounded in excellence shows up everywhere and that it becomes a movement.
I'm looking forward to hanging out at Black Coffee with my friends and feeling safe.
Black coffee to me means opportunity for people like me and my other friends and family to come here and do homework safely and hang out and stuff like that.
That is happening. It is happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought the responses to the question about mental health were fantastic, mostly because they had so much in-depth knowledge of it and the ways in which people do not have equal access to mental health care in Seattle. You know, I recently went through a mental health crisis with one of my children, and trying to get a bed for them and get them the care that they deserve or they needed was really difficult. And I'm really grateful that I have insurance through the University of Washington. But I was told for the kind of treatment that they needed, even post coming out of inpatient care, that there was an extensive wait list had they not been on private insurance. So people who are on state insurance or people who don't have insurance are looking at extremely long wait times if they can even get access to treatment at all. And that is something that really needs to change.
Yeah, they were very, very good responses. I agree. They are showing an incredible depth of knowledge on the challenges that Seattle is facing, and articulating very, very well solid ideas on how to address those challenges that will make the city more livable for everybody. With that, I'll go ahead and roll the second part.
Okay. Housing affordability is a major problem for Seattle. 88% of Seattle's land that is zoned for housing is zoned for single-family units. Over the last 5 years, most of the new construction has been centered in the 12% that supports high-density housing. Developers and builders focus on small footprint properties with minimum parking and luxury appointments.
I know most people don't probably wouldn't believe this. This is actually one of the issues I'm most excited to work on. I think a lot of folks see me as just the police person. And to be honest, exclusionary zoning, our legacy of exclusionary zoning, is contributing to so many of the problems that we're facing in the city. So there's a book called The Color of Law that really digs into how housing is a determinant of how people thrive, is a determinant of whether or not communities experience high rates of violence. It's a determinant of whether or not communities are over policed. Housing plays a big role in that. And we have really chosen not to turn and face our legacy of exclusionary zoning. Our current zoning pattern has created a bifurcated city. 2/3 of our residential land is not accessible to all but those who have the highest incomes, which is a serious issue. So we need to be changing our zoning, and as we approach this 2024 comprehensive plan, to be building a mix of housing and residential patterns that allows more people to live in more places throughout the city. There are a number of reports that have come out that have actually recommended us addressing our zoning issues, and I think it's very important that we do it. There are examples of cities like Portland has a residential infill project where they have basically re-legalized the missing middle or missing middle housing citywide, and so this allows for a diversity of housing structures to exist in the city. Seattle has committed itself in a lot of ways to building urban villages. And so we need to both expand our current urban villages, but also be strategic about the places where we build new ones. There is transit infrastructure being built throughout the city, and there are areas that need more transit infrastructure. And those would be areas that would be right for urban villages, but it cannot continue to happen on the same 12% of land. We have 85% of the developing happening on 12% of the land, which is just really unacceptable. We also cannot do it in our industrial lands. There's been some talk about building affordable housing in our industrial lands, and there are place-based industries that happen in those spaces that cannot happen anywhere else. So it doesn't make sense to build there. Not to mention, our industrial land areas are also very much food deserts, and we don't know about the toxicity of the area and the long-term impacts that would have on folks. So I'm really excited to work on our comprehensive plan for 2024. It is a huge chance to do zoning reform, to make significant strides on housing affordability. It is also an opportunity to address our climate crisis. With all of the new housing that we would build, we can build it green. We can be thinking about our sustainable infrastructure. We can be building transit in a way that helps us reach our climate goals. Having more people being able to travel within the area that they live by foot or by bike or by bus or by light rail will make a significant decrease on the things that we're facing with the climate crisis. So I'm really excited to work on this particular issue, and also believe that housing fundamentally is a major determinant of the things that we're seeing. And housing in our area, and this is something, again, we have to grapple with, has been highly racialized based on who is getting the wealth and income gains in our city, who's getting access to high earner jobs. And so the last part of this is also anti-displacement and anti-gentrification strategies that ensure that people can stay in place. I'm thinking about our seniors who, as property taxes increase, cannot afford to keep their homes. I'm thinking about young people who have grown up here who may not be getting into those pipelines into high earner jobs, and as a result either will spend the rest of their life as renters, though many of them cannot afford that, or they'll never get to have any type of home ownership. So we also need to think about co-op models, community land trust, as ways of ensuring that people can also build equity. Equity is how a lot of white folks have been able to build their legacies, send their young people, their children to college. And many Black, Native, Latinx folks have been excluded from building equity through home ownership. So thinking about co-ops and community land trust is also a huge opportunity to be able to open up that opportunity for equity and wealth building that many communities based on race have been excluded from.
Do you support changing zoning rules for ADUs and more dense construction to alleviate the housing crisis?
ADUs are an opportunity to build another diversity of housing and build housing for the missing middle, but that cannot be our only answer. There has to be a much greater diversity of housing options that we're doing the work of presenting. So, thinking of quadplexes and other things that can be built. And I know that a lot of folks then will push back and say, well, what about the character of our communities? I understand that. And also we are in the midst of a huge affordability and housing crisis. And if we continue to allow things to go the way we're going, then we're going to be building a city just for a few and then excluding the many. Accepting that density is going to be something that equitably needs to be taken on by all neighborhoods is just a really important factor of building our city in a just and equitable way that is accessible to everyone, because having areas of land that are just fully excluded for some people is not acceptable. That's not an inclusive city. That is not a city that has a race and social justice initiative. We need to be reckoning with the fact that our very first comprehensive plan that was put in place in the 1920s was done so in collaboration with someone by the name of Harlan Bartholomew. And Harlan Bartholomew was a known segregationist and basically helped us develop our first version of these exclusionary zones went in place. And then in the 1980s, we did a huge down zone that then prevented even more families from moving into certain places. So if we're going to have a city that makes it so everyone who works here can live here, then we're going to have to take density on equitably.
And how do you combat gentrification while also meeting housing needs?
I think it's about how you build, and it is about acknowledging who doesn't have access to the housing. There are anti-displacement strategies we can put in place. This is where co-op models and community land trusts are important. This is also where the city getting into housing is key. We have many reports, the Seattle Growth Strategy White Paper, the Neighborhoods for All Executive Summary, actually all outline for us that we know which neighborhoods are most at risk of gentrification and displacement. And yet we still have started our building, the places that we build density, we have built there first. So our strategy is off. We need to be starting in spaces where we know we will have the least amount of impact while simultaneously doing those things that help keep people in place. This is where thinking about our seniors and the rising cost of property taxes is really important. What are we doing to help folks on fixed incomes be able to maintain their homes? How are we doing one-to-one replacement of housing? So if we tear down a building that is affordable, are we putting up one-to-one ratio of affordable units and ensuring that people can come back? Now, that is also really challenging. I know they've said at Yes Lord Terrace, there's a 100% rate of people returning back, but that's of those who wanted to return back. Many people, when they left Yes Lord Terrace, when we literally sold off public land, which I don't think we should have done, had to move and then did not have, they'd already moved somewhere else, started living in that place, and then chose not to move back because it wasn't necessarily the best decision for them at that time. So really thinking about when we do tear down buildings that are affordable, are we doing our best job to ensure that folks have a real ability to move back into that space? Are we preserving our public land so that we as a city can continue to get involved in that? Are we doing the anti-displacement work of addressing rising property taxes and supporting people in staying in their homes? And again, this is where the development needs to be taken on more equitably. We know where folks are living that are most at risk of being displaced. Why do we as a city continue to build density in those areas first, rather than prioritizing other areas of the city where when development is received, people likely won't be displaced?
Seattle has a reputation for having high taxes compared to other Washington cities. A number of initiatives through the years have added incremental taxes to fund transit, homeless programs, education, and the general fund. These taxes are small on paper. A number of 0.1% taxes have been passed by voters and supported by the council as an example. Most of those taxes are regressive due to Washington State's tax structure. Will you pledge no new taxes on the citizens of Seattle? What programs would you want to see cut if you were on the council?
I don't think I can 100% pledge no new taxes on all of the citizens of Seattle, or all of the residents, I should say. There are wealthy folks in our communities that don't pay their fair share in taxes. There are corporations that don't pay their fair share in taxes. And I think that there are taxes to be put in place. I think it's important for those folks to be paying. So what I can commit to is doing the work of not putting more taxes on those who already pay more. And finding ways to eliminate our regressive tax structure, which requires that as the city of Seattle, we actually be a part of pushing our state legislature to make those changes, but also do it in a way that doesn't remove the ability of cities or localities to continue to put in place their own taxes on big business or the wealthy. Our tax structure is very regressive, and the wealthiest amongst us pay anywhere from 0 to 2% in taxes. And those who have the least pay somewhere from 0 to 17%. And I just don't think that that is acceptable. So we need to do the work of addressing our regressive tax system. There are taxes that we can continue to address around big business. that could be augmented or grown. And I think we should grow those taxes because our city does need to generate more revenue to meet the immense amount of social needs that exist. And we know that when we meet those social needs, our city as a whole will be safer.
Nikkita, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program. I'm so glad that our viewers will have a chance to hear your positions, understand them more fully, and be able to make a decision in this election.
Thank you. I appreciate sharing space with you. Thank you so much.
I'm laughing because it's like we have to be objective because, but wow, I guess that's my objective feedback. Wow.
Can I just say I've had a little crush since the last mayoral election. I'm not going to lie. But did you see all those books? Did you hear them drop book names and like historicize things? Okay.
I was engineer for that recording. Renee did all the heavy lifting, but I did comment like I love all the books. So yes, I absolutely noticed all of the books in the background. The responses are great. There was substance to the responses. Yes. That's the thing. There wasn't just bullets and yes. talking points. And I'm going to say the things that you want to hear to get me elected. The other thing I found interesting is there was wonkiness, but without wonkiness, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the big thing and the thing that people should pay attention to is if candidates are able to give depth in their responses, if they can point to historical factors, if they can historicize current conditions, because that is extremely important to be able to understand the history of the area that you want to take part in, like soliciting change in at that level.
Absolutely. Next, we're going to have is Lorena Gonzalez, who is running for mayor. And that will be the next one that we have up. Yep. Seattle Gay News is in partnership with this Nikkita Oliver interview with us. Seattle Gay News actually asked even more questions. Their article that will include questions that expand upon what we asked will be in the print edition of Seattle Gay News next week. Our article, which will include the transcript of the interview over this 2-day period, will be available tomorrow. The other thing that we're going to make available is the video is just one chunk of the entire interview, so you don't have to go to yesterday's show and today's show, and make it much easier for you to grab that video. The other thing we're going to do, because this was a long interview, is we have the audio file. We're going to make that audio file available. So if you just want to grab the audio file, put on some headphones and listen, you can do that in its entirety too. Jennifer, are we ready to keep moving to the next story? Because we're running over time.
I just want to give another quick shout out to Renee.
Sorry, what?
I just wanted to give another quick shout out to Renee because that was a fantastic interview. So
props to Renee. You're 100% correct in that. You know what? Spam those hearts. Spam those hearts. Give Renee the mad love that she deserves for the Nikkita Oliver interview. If you're watching on YouTube or Twitch, you just do a big long line of hearts. Love you, Renee. I know Renee loves hearing